The reason I'm running for Senate is I believe that there's a short window of opportunity to change things in this nation. You look at where our debt is, the difference between us and Greece in reality is, they have a little bit higher debt to GDP, but the big difference is that they can print, we can print money, they can't. And I'm frightened that we're going to get to that point, and it's going to be very difficult. Because the fact of the matter is that China and other countries are trying to create a reserve currency. India is actually buying oil from Iran with gold. And so as the moment that we're no longer the world reserve currency, we're going to face the stark reality that we can't continue to borrow money. And it's not good policy anyway. And so, as my wife and I were trying to decide if we were going to run, I looked at my 5 children, and frankly, they were the biggest reason for me not to run. But I would look at my 5 children, and they were the biggest reason for me to run. And so I'm a big believer that we need to reform entitlements, but that's not enough. We've got to cut entire departments, get back to the basics of the Constitution. If it's not in the U.S. Constitution, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. We need to get rid of the Department of Education. One of the things that I want to do as a senator is actually make the senator's position less powerful. I want to push as much power back to the states as possible and have the senators focus on the things that they're supposed to do according to the Constitution. And one of those things, I think, is the advise and consent role. Many people overlook that as far as the Senate, and that goes for nominating or vetting Supreme Court justices. I look at the case in Washington, D.C. where the Second Amendment was ruled as an individual right, and most people were very happy with that ruling. I was absolutely frightened by that ruling, because what should have been a 9-0 ruling was actually a 5-4 decision. And so one of the most important roles of a U.S. Senator is to make sure they vet Supreme Court justices, to make sure that they believe the way that we do in the Constitution. The Second Amendment, anybody that believes that the U.S. Constitution is a living document shouldn't be put on the bench. I think they're going to make some very important decisions in the next few years. You look at the decision they're going to make next week, or at least here next week with Obamacare. That's one of the most important decisions. And so I will be willing to stand up and vet the candidates and not approve those that believe that the Constitution is a living document, that they can reinterpret it or to look to foreign law. I think we were all appalled by Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her comments that in Egypt that she wouldn't look for the U.S. Constitution as a model, that she would prefer the South African Constitution, which for me is quite telling to somebody that should hold that document sacred. And so I'm concerned about the direction of our nation. And as I said, we need to reform entitlements, we need to cut entire departments, and then I'm a big believer that that's not enough. We're in such an economic mess that we've got to have a Manhattan-style energy project to grow our economy. We're blessed to have more natural resources in this nation than almost any other nation. We have more oil in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming than the entire Middle East. And if we can simply access it. And so, again, if we simply reform entitlements, that's absolutely important. And even if we cut entire departments, that's not going to be enough. We need to make sure that we use our natural resources, get us away from being dependent on foreign oil, and get us, again, back to the basics of limited government and self-sufficiency. One of the appalling things to me is that in 2010 we became actually a net importer of food. And that's primarily because of our ridiculous ethanol policies. We're actually burning our fuel when we have plenty of fuel. And that's an instant tax cut that will, I believe, restart our nation's economy if we simply take the opportunity to develop our natural resources. First off, I'm grateful for the service that Senator Hatch has done. Anybody that's put 36 years of service, he's sacrificed a big part of his life. But there's a number of things that I would do different than Senator Hatch. Probably, and people find this interesting that I would say this, but one of the things that I struggle with the most that Senator Hatch often says is that I've never had a conservative majority, and so therefore I've never been able to get the things that I want pushed through. Well, for me, if you don't have a conservative majority, you go out and work and and create one. You go out and teach the principles of conservatism, or you go out and work and help get others elected. We kind of did that here in the state of Utah with the Patrick Henry Caucus. We weren't happy with the direction that this state was going and concerned about the nation. And 5 legislators, we came in as freshmen and were basically told, don't cause too many waves, and in 6 years you can have some influence or have a chairmanship. Well, we immediately set out to drive the agenda. We formed a coalition. It was, we started talking about the lands issues. I passed model legislation 2 years ago. We pushed, it was a sophomore legislator, Representative Wimmer, that did the opt-out of Obamacare, that we realized that we had to work with the grassroots. There was resistance to that, but we were in front of the Supreme Court. We were talking about the fiscal issues before it was popular. And so to me it goes and shows that you get a group of individuals that you don't have to have seniority, and that you go out and you create a coalition of individuals. And so obviously some of the fiscal issues I would have voted differently. TARP obviously is a big one for me, the stimulus. And one of the frustrating things for me is that Congress has given up, Congress and the Senate has given up so much of its power to the executive branch through rulemaking authority. One of the things that I want to make sure to do is to go back to Washington, D.C. and have every rule that is ever passed by the executive branch have to come back through the legislative branch. Because too often you'll hear senators or representatives say, well, I don't really control that EPA regulation. Well, if it were to come back, it's originally the legislative branch's responsibility to pass those laws, but they give the executive branch rulemaking authority. Frankly, that's the reason that we have the Grand Staircase National Monument. Years ago, Congress gave the executive branch the ability to make national monuments. That needs to be pulled back and kept back in the power. And so it's the same thing for every law that affects our life that takes away freedom. There's probably 100 rules. And so for him not to watch that and to oversee the EPA, the other departments, Department of Education, those departments that are making rules on us every day, again, they need to be voting on those rules rather than simply giving that authority to the executive branch. I would have voted different on the NDAA, and there's a number of issues, but for me it's primarily, I actually believe the state of Utah has many talented people, and that we were meant to have a citizen legislature. People should go in, make their difference in 1, 2, possibly 3 terms, and then give somebody else a chance. A few of the things that set me apart of the senators is you can look at my record. I've consistently been conservative the 6 years that I've served in the state legislature. I've been willing to stand up, take on the Republican establishment when it needed to be taken on. I support the Republican Party when the platform is good, and I'm willing to disagree with them when they're wrong. I think one of the problems that we have in Washington, D.C. is that we blame all the problems on Democrats. Some of the biggest entitlement programs have been done under Republicans, and so we need people that are willing to stand up to their own party. You look at my international experience. I've spent 5 years overseas. For me, a lot of the things that we're talking about, Mitt Romney talked about not wanting to go to a European socialist state. I've lived 2 years of my life in Sweden, where I saw that state. I've spent 3 years in the former Soviet Union. I can tell you that socialism does not work. Socialism robs the individual of their full potential. It weakens the family, and it eventually morally, and as we're seeing in Europe, financially bankrupts a country. For me, those aren't academic concepts. I've seen that. My wife grew up in the Soviet Union. She literally bears the scars of socialized medicine. And so for me, those are core principles that I'm willing to stand up. When I was 16, I applied to BYU, went on received a presidential scholarship and went on a BYU semester abroad. And while I was there, I had 2 experiences that changed me forever. And one of those was seeing the Iron Curtain for the very first time when we were traveling to Hungary. I can tell you it was brutal in its appearance. It was iron, and it was barbed wire, machine guns, and the machine guns were pointed in to keep their people in because of a political system. I don't want to go to that system. And I've seen I've seen people that have paid a high price for freedom under a socialist state. And so I want to make sure that we don't go that direction. The key issues that I'll fight for in the Senate are the same ones that I've been fighting for the last 5 years here in the state. Fiscal responsibility, making sure that we live within our budget. I truly believe that our national debt has become our greatest national security issue. Unfortunately, the world is every bit as dangerous as it was during the Cold War, but we don't have the luxury of what Ronald Reagan did. He was able to spend the Soviet Union into oblivion. We can't do that right now, and so we need to make sure that we get that national debt under control. The other things that I've been working on is making sure that we get access to our lands. There's no reason for the state of Utah not to be like North Dakota that has 2% unemployment if we can simply get control of our lands. I passed legislation 2 years ago that got national attention. It was model legislation for ALEC to push back. Alexander Hamilton said that he expected state legislators to be jealous guardians against encroachments of the federal government. That's what I've done for the last 5 years, and that's what I'm planning on doing back in Washington, D.C., is pushing the power back to this country, because we do need to make sure that we wean ourselves off of foreign oil. Repealing Obamacare is a primary focus of mine. I can tell you stories about being in socialist hospitals that would frighten you. As I said, my wife literally bears the scars of socialized medicine, and I'm willing to stand up. It's one of those things that 3 years ago I was at the University of Utah giving a talk, and I was asked what was one of the biggest threats to the United States, and I said the acceptance of socialism, and a third of the audience erupted in the most mocking laughter. But I've been willing to say that that system doesn't work. But you look around this election cycle, and everybody's talking about the dangers of a socialist state. From Mitt Romney, everybody's been talking about the things that we've been working on, the lands issues. It's flattering that everybody's realizing now the importance of land and how it ties to our education. And then the deficit. You know, I was one of 14 individuals that voted against the stimulus money that came to the state of Utah. I've been willing to stand up on principle. And so it's those things, and finally it would be to make sure that we fully vet our Supreme Court justices, and not only our Supreme Court justice, but also the department heads. And so what I would like everybody to do is take a look at my record. My website is www.herrod2012.com. That's Herrod 2012.com. Give me a chance, and I think you'll find that I've been a person that's been willing to stand up. I'm not afraid to take on the tough issues, but I hope that everybody realizes that this is probably the most critical election in our lifetime. Remember, vote for Chris Herrod during the convention. Thank you.